Welcome everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Top 10 American Rock Bands. So these bands symbolize the American spirit, they ooze American attitude, and while they're some of the biggest bands in the world, they're also America's ambassadors to rock. So join me as we count down 10 of rock's most amazing bands, American style. But before we go any further, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please click the button. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by subscribing, you'll be able to stay up to date on all that goes on in the world of music, just like this with the top 10 American rock bands. And before we start the countdown though, I've got 3 honorable mentions. They came very close to making the list, but of course with only 10 spots, space is limited. Coming in for the first honorable mention, we've got shock rock band Alice Cooper. The band version of it, not the solo artist. Second, we got Heartland rockers Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And third, glam metal band Poison. All coming very close to making this list, but as I said, just space is limited. So kicking off the top 10 American rock bands, and coming in at number 10, Cheap Trick. Coming from Chicago, Illinois, they formed 47 years ago in 1974, and their sound is a mix of Beatlesque pop sensibilities with a do-it-yourself kind of raw feeling of punk mixed in there. They released their self-titled debut in 1977 and first found success in Japan. But by 1979, they finally reached the top 10 in America with the song I Want You to Want Me off of At Budokan, which came out in 1979. They would continue their success into the 1980s and reached the top spot on the Billboard charts with 1988's The Flame. And they became a major influence into early 90s grunge and alternative bands. The band is still going today, which is amazing. They've performed over 3,700 times and sold more than 20 million albums worldwide. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2016. Coming in at number 9, we've got The Doors from Los Angeles, California. Formed 56 years ago in 1965. They're one of the more controversial acts from the 1960s, mostly due to the lyrics by vocalist Jim Morrison and his erratic stage behavior. But musically, they mixed in all kinds of influence such as jazz, Latin influences, and orchestration, helping to define the band and really make them stand out from the rest of the pack. They released their self-titled debut in 1967, which found immediate success with the song Light My Fire, going all the way to the top spot on the Billboard charts. And although the band only released 6 studio albums with Morrison before he quit the band in 1971 or took a sabbatical, depending upon how you look at it. Unfortunately, though, he died 4 months later, official cause being heart failure. No autopsy was done at the time. The 3 remaining members did attempt to carry on and recorded 2 more studio albums, but of course, without Morrison, the fans just weren't interested in the band. Disbanded in 1973, and the Doors were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. And while there have been various reunions over the years, including the outstanding Ian Astbury of The Cult filling in for Jim Morrison, none of them reached the heights of the original Doors. All right, coming in at number 8, Kiss from New York City. Formed 48 years ago in 1973 and best known for each of the band members' face paint and special persona, and also with their outrageous outfits and of course shocking pyrotechnic performances. Their sound is a mix of anthemic hard rock, fist-pounding rock and roll. They released their self-titled debut in 1973, first building their reputation though as a live band. They exploded though in 1975 with the release of arguably one of the greatest live albums ever, Alive. And after that, it was just pure Kiss mania. Anything and everything that could be bought, sold, or branded got a Kiss logo on it. And the band eventually took off the makeup though in the 1980s and found a renewed interest for the band. Later in the 1990s, they did reunite with the original lineup to huge success, and they've continued to dominate the touring market ever since. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2014. Currently, they're on their farewell tour, so catch them if you can. All right, coming in at number 7, we've got Journey. San Francisco, California-based band formed 48 years ago in 1973 from the former with former members, I should say, of the Santana Band. Initially, though, they were a jazz fusion band and made 3 albums under this style before adding frontman Steve Perry in 1977 and changing to a much more melodic AOR sound style for the band. And this was met with great success in 1978 through to 1987, reaching new commercial heights with the 1981 album Escape, which went 9 times platinum, and their 1983 album Frontiers, which went 6 times platinum, and then their 1988 Greatest Hits has sold 15 times platinum. So the band is estimated to have sold over 80 million albums worldwide. In the 1990s, they did reunite with Steve Perry, but it was short-lived, and the band has continued to tour and evolve with members over the years. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2017. Recently, though, they announced a new band lineup and released their first new recording in a decade. The song is called The Way We Used to Be. You can check that out. It's available to stream, and it is full-on classic journey as only they can do it. Coming in at number 6, we've got Bon Jovi from Sayreville, New Jersey, formed 38 years ago in 1983. It all started with a demo recording of the song Runaway by John Bon Jovi in 1982. Radio stations picked it up from a compilation album of local bands and took off, necessitating John into needing a backing band in order to promote it. In order to capitalize on this, he formed the band and they named it Bon Jovi after his last name to capitalize on that solo single. So the band has been credited, though, with bridging the gap between heavy metal and pop. And while they are a rock band, they definitely have a knack for writing catchy pop tunes as well. And they released their self-titled debut in 1984, but it wasn't until their third album, Slippery When Wet, in 1986 that they really hit the big time. The album has gone on to sell 28 million copies worldwide. They then followed that up with the massive album New Jersey in 1988, which has sold 18 million copies worldwide. And the band would continue to find success throughout the 80s and 90s, including a renewed interest in the band in the early 2000s. And although the band is estimated to have sold over 100 million albums worldwide, they've never broke up, although they have continued to change some members, and they are still going strong today, performing more than 2,700 concerts in over 50 different countries. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2018. All right, coming in at number 5, we've got Boston from, of course, Boston, Massachusetts. Formed 46 years ago in 1975, they released their self-titled debut album in 1976, and it ranks as one of the best-selling albums in all of American history, selling 17 million copies. But the amazing production work on the album that would go on to define a whole era was actually just original demos recorded by multi-instrumentalist Tom Scholz in his basement, if you can believe that. The band's sound began as classic melodic rock, AOR, and arena rock, mixing acoustic and electric instrumentation. Over the years, though, the recordings have become consistently more complex, with Tom Scholz always searching for that perfect recording. Unfortunately, this has greatly slowed the pace of his recording. In all, the band has only released 6 studio albums in 46 years. Despite this, though, they've sold over 75 million albums worldwide. They've never broken up, but the band members consistently change in order to suit the needs of the recordings. Shockingly, though, Boston has never been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is really, really hard to believe. Next at number 4, we got ZZ Top from Houston, Texas. Formed 52 years ago in 1969. Of course, best known for their frontmen that both have beards. Interestingly, though, the one member that does not have a beard, his last name is Beard, Frank Beard on the drums. And the other amazing fact is that the same 3 guys that started this band in 1969 are still together today. Not many bands can say that. Their sound was initially rooted in the blues, but evolved into a more straight-ahead blues rock. They released their first album, ZZ Top's First, in 1971, going on to great popularity throughout the 70s. but it was their new sound in 1983 on the album Eliminator where the band actually broke into the big time. They integrated into their sound new wave, dance rock, and other stuff along with their blues-based sound. It was a huge success, selling over 10 million copies in the US. They continued that new sound for the rest of the 80s into the early 90s before reverting back to a straight-ahead blues rock approach. Since then, they've been rocking ever since and were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2004. And despite being around 52 years, they just announced a new world tour, so you can check them out on that. Okay, and coming in at number 3, Guns N' Roses from Los Angeles, California, formed 36 years ago in 1985 from the ashes of two really big local bands at the time, Hollywood Rose with Axl Rose and LA Guns with Tracy Guns, merging the names of the two lead members in the group into Guns N' Roses. And while their sound is rooted in 70s hard rock and blues-based bands like that, GNR started though as a glam metal band before shedding that image and taking on the moniker of the world's most dangerous band. They released their debut album, Appetite for Destruction, in 1987, and it was not an immediate success. It actually took about a year to catch on, but when it did, it absolutely exploded. It took the world by storm, and not only that, it actually changed the music industry in the process. The album has gone on to become the best-selling debut album of all time, selling 18 million copies in the US and 30 million copies worldwide. The band then followed that up with Lies in 1988 and the massive double album Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 in 1991. Since then, though, there has only been one additional studio album of original material released, Chinese Democracy, in 2008, which took 17 long years to record. And so despite only releasing 6 studio albums, they have sold over 100 million copies worldwide. And the band was finally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2012. And then they finally reformed in 2016, and for the last 5 years, they've been touring nonstop, welcoming us back to the jungle of American hard rock. All right, coming in at number 2, we got Van Halen from Pasadena, California, formed 47 years ago in 1974. The band is best known for the guitar playing style of Eddie Van Halen and for having two of the most iconic frontmen in all of rock. David Lee Roth fronted the band from 1974 to 1985, and Sammy Hagar fronted the band from 1985 to 1996, both for 11 years. And while their sound is rooted in hard rock, they did have early flares of what would later become glam metal. They released their self-titled debut album in 1978, which featured one of the most iconic guitar instrumentals ever, the song Eruption, where Eddie Van Halen single-handedly redefined the guitar in 1 minute and 42 seconds. The album has gone on to sell 10 million copies in the US, and the band would rise all the way to the top in 1984, releasing an album of the same name, which also sold 10 million copies. But in a shocking move, Roth left the band and in came Sammy Hagar. However, the band didn't miss a beat. They kept on going and had continued huge success through the rest of the 80s and even into the 90s, despite the changing musical climate with grunge and alternative at the time. They had on-again, off-again reunions that did take place. They even brought in former Extreme vocalist Gary Cherone for one album, but nothing really stuck until 2007 when they reunited with Roth. That same year, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Unfortunately, though, Eddie Van Halen died in 2020, silencing one of the most amazing guitar players ever to play the instrument. Okay, and coming in as your number 1 American rock band, Aerosmith from Boston, Massachusetts, formed 51 years ago in 1970. The band is still the same 5 guys that started out, which not many bands can say, save for the previously mentioned ZZ Top, of course. Their sound is rooted in blues-based hard rock, and they are another band that heavily influenced the 80s rock and glam metal scene. The band released their self-titled debut in 1973 and began a rise of dominance throughout the 70s with their first 5 albums all going multi-platinum. The band went through a rough patch though in the early 80s, but returned stronger and ready to conquer the rock world again, and they did just that in 1987 with the album Permanent Vacation, selling 5 million copies in the US, followed by Pump in 1989, selling 7 million copies in the US, and then following that up with Get a Grip in 1993, also selling 7 million copies in the US. And then in 1998, they reached the top of the charts, having a number 1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 with I Don't Want to Miss a Thing from the Armageddon soundtrack. Since then, though, the band has had its ups and downs both in recording and touring, but in all of this, they have remained brothers and have continued to tour, and most importantly, they have stayed together, delivering some of the best American rock of all time. And there you go, that is the top 10 American rock bands. Keep an eye out for a future episode of the top 10 British rock bands, and don't forget to check the description for links to related videos. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and if you did, please remember to comment, like, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts. I hope everyone has a great day, and I'll talk to you all real soon. Bye, everyone.